The desert was merciless. Twin suns pounded down on an endless ocean of dunes that glimmered like molten glass. The air itself shimmered with heat, dry enough to burn the lungs. Nothing moved here except the wind, and even that carried no mercy, just grit and dust that scraped the eyes raw. This wasteland was where soldiers came to die, forgotten by both sides of the war above. Captain Jareth Kane staggered forward, every step a battle against gravity and exhaustion. His combat armor, once gleaming, was now split and seared from plasma strikes. Its servos groaned, power cells drained to almost nothing. He wasn't much better off. Blood crusted under his collar, lips cracked and swollen, tongue like leather from thirst. For 3 days he had walked across this cursed desert with no food and almost no water. Only a single vial remained, sealed against his chest plate. Inside sloshed less than a mouthful. A man's final hope. He told himself he would save it for when he absolutely needed it, when his body was moments from shutting down, when he could no longer rise from the sand. That small sip might keep him standing for another hour, and that hour might matter. But in truth, he clung to the vial as a talisman, something to remind him he was still alive. Soldiers died fast on the front lines, but thirst was a slower, crueler enemy. His boots dragged him toward the wreck of a shuttle jutting half-buried from the dunes. It was a human craft, scarred by orbital fire, smoke still curling from its torn belly. He didn't expect survivors. Ships that fell from orbit rarely left anything alive. Still, wrecks offered shelter, sometimes rations, sometimes hope. And Jareth was too stubborn to lie down and die. He climbed into the broken fuselage, the heat inside stifling, shadows stretching long across twisted metal. At first he thought the sound was his imagination, the faintest rasp of breath. But then it came again, a fragile groan. He froze, rifle half raised. From behind a collapsed panel he saw her. A young woman, skin blistered by sun, desert rags clinging to her thin frame. She was alive, but barely. Her lips were split, her face streaked with sweat and dust. Her hand lifted weakly, reaching not for a weapon but for salvation. "Please!" The word cracked apart on her tongue. Jareth's instincts screamed caution. He had 1 vial left, barely a sip. Enough for himself, maybe enough to carry him to another dawn. A stranger in this desert meant competition, risk, maybe even betrayal. He had seen plenty of men fight to the death for less. Logic told him to walk away, but then he looked into her eyes. Faint as her strength was, her gaze burned with defiance, with something he knew all too well, the will to survive no matter the odds. There was something else, too, something that pricked at the edge of memory, a familiarity he couldn't place. Without thinking further, he unclipped the vial. The sun caught on the liquid as if mocking him with how little remained. He twisted the cap, his throat screaming in protest at what he was about to do. Then he tilted the vial carefully to her lips. She drank. Not greedily, though she must have wanted to. Just enough to wet her tongue, to ease the pain of cracked flesh. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, then opened again, clearer this time. "You... why?" Her voice was almost too faint to hear. Jareth's throat ached with thirst, but his answer came steady. "Because you're human. Out here, that's enough." She coughed a laugh, though it was dry and weak. Then her hand touched his, just for an instant, before falling back. He felt the tremor of her pulse, fragile but still beating. For the first time in days, Jareth didn't feel entirely alone in the desert. He had given away his last hope, yes, but he saw something in her that he had lost in himself, fire that refused to go out. He didn't know her name, her story, or why fate had left them both stranded here. What he didn't know, what neither of them could yet know, was that the blood tying them together ran deeper than thirst, deeper than survival. The sip of water he had surrendered wasn't just a kindness. It was the spark of something far greater, the reunion of a father and a daughter, bound by war, by sacrifice, and by secrets buried in the sands of Avarice 9. The desert at night was no safer than the day. The sun sank, but the cold crept in mercilessly, cutting through sweat-soaked clothes and cracked armor. Above the dunes, the sky lit not with stars, but with burning streaks, wreckage tumbling down from orbit. Avaris 9 was dying, piece by piece, as the war raged overhead. Jareth and the girl she had finally given her name, Lyra, huddled inside the wrecked shuttle. The sandstorm outside rattled broken hull plates, howling like the cries of ghosts. The glow from distant explosions flickered through gaps in the fuselage. "You were up there, weren't you?" Lyra asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice carried a sharp edge, not the frailty of before. Jareth looked at her, surprised by how quickly she seemed to be regaining strength. The sip of water hadn't been enough for recovery. This was something else, an iron will he hadn't expected. "I was," he admitted. "I commanded the Iron Fang's ground division before it burned. The Zerath cut us to pieces." Her eyes narrowed. "And you survived." "Surviving isn't winning," he muttered. Outside, a shadow swept across the dunes. Low clicking sounds echoed through the hull, too deliberate to be wind. Jareth's pulse quickened. He raised a hand for silence. Lyra stiffened instantly, her instincts sharp. Through a crack in the shuttle wall, he saw them. 3 Zerath hunters, their insectoid bodies glinting under the moonlight. Mandibles twitched as they sniffed the air, spindly legs carrying them with an unnatural grace across the sand. Their carapaces shimmered with alien biotech armor, and each carried a jagged plasma blade. "Scouts," Jareth whispered. "If they find us, they'll call in the swarm." Lyra's jaw tightened. She reached for a broken panel of steel, sharp enough at one end to serve as a blade. Her movements were rough but fearless. Jareth frowned. She wasn't panicking. She was preparing to fight. "You don't know what you're up against," he warned. "Doesn't matter," she said. "They bleed like anything else." The hunters moved closer, antennae quivering. Jareth's rifle, patched with scavenged wires, hummed faintly as he powered it up. He'd get maybe 5 shots before it overheated. He calculated their odds, slim. But slim was better than none. The first Zerath lunged into the shuttle wreckage, mandibles snapping. Jareth fired, the plasma bolt tearing through its chest. Acid hissed as it splattered across the sand. The other 2 screeched, charging. Lyra moved before Jareth could stop her. She darted in low, swinging her makeshift blade with raw ferocity. The jagged metal found a weak joint beneath the alien's arm, and it shrieked in pain. Jareth gunned down the second, but his rifle overheated, vents glowing red. The last hunter grabbed Lyra, claws snapping inches from her face. She struggled, kicking wildly. Without thinking, Jareth dropped the useless rifle and slammed his armored shoulder into the alien, knocking it off balance. Lyra seized the moment and drove her shard deep into its throat. The hunter thrashed once, then collapsed in a twitching heap. For a moment, silence reigned. The stink of alien ichor mixed with the bitter air. Jareth stared at Lyra, breathing hard. She stood over the corpse, chest heaving, her blade dripping green. "Where the hell did you learn to fight like that?" he asked. Her eyes flicked to him, challenging. "Didn't need to learn. Just needed a reason." Jareth felt something stir in his chest, not just admiration, but recognition. The way she moved, the reckless bravery, the refusal to yield, it was like watching a younger version of himself. He didn't voice it, but the thought dug deep. She's not just a survivor. She's a warrior. Above them, thunder rolled, not from storms, but from starship cannons. The sky burned brighter as the Zerath fleet descended, thousands of ships blotting out the constellations. The earth trembled as larger vessels broke atmosphere, their engines screaming like gods tearing holes in the sky. Lyra tightened her grip on her weapon. "They're coming, aren't they?" Jareth nodded grimly. "Not just scouts this time. The invasion begins at dawn." They both looked out across the endless desert, the horizon glowing with the fire of falling ships. Survival had been hard enough in the sands. Now came the real test, against an empire that devoured worlds without pity. For the first time in years, Jareth felt something stronger than despair claw its way through the darkness. Lyra's presence wasn't just coincidence. She was proof humanity hadn't been broken yet. And tomorrow, when the swarm came, they would fight together. The desert stretched endlessly, dunes rolling like frozen waves under the pale light of the suns. For 2 days after the fight with the hunters, Jareth and Lyra pressed deeper into the wastelands, following a weak distress signal that pulsed steadily from the horizon. It was their only thread of direction in a world that wanted to swallow them whole. The days were brutal, heat like fire, air so dry it cracked skin with every breath. At night, the cold cut to the bone, forcing them to share what little warmth they could find inside shallow caves or broken wrecks. Each hour tested their endurance. Yet Jareth noticed something unsettling. Lyra never complained. She moved like someone accustomed to hardship, her eyes scanning every dune like a soldier on patrol. One evening, as they made camp beside the carcass of an old transport, Jareth busied himself repairing his rifle with scraps of circuitry scavenged from wreckage. Lyra sat across from him, sharpening her shard of metal with almost ritual focus. The fire between them spat weakly, barely enough to keep the chill at bay. "You handle yourself too well for a scavenger," Jareth muttered, not looking up. Lyra's eyes flicked up, challenging. "Maybe you underestimate scavengers," he smirked despite himself. "No, I recognize combat instincts when I see them. You fight like someone who's lost too much to quit." Her gaze softened for a moment, then hardened again. "You think you're the only one who's lost things out here?" Jareth didn't reply. He'd buried too many names in too many places to count. The silence stretched until Lyra broke it. "Did you ever know a woman named Rinna?" The name struck him like a physical blow. His fingers froze over the rifle's wiring. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in decades. Yet it carried every ghost of a life he had chosen to abandon. He saw Rinna in memory, firelight reflecting in her dark eyes, the warmth of her laughter echoing through a mining camp on Helion, promises whispered when war seemed far away. Then he remembered leaving. Orders came, duty called, and he walked away from her without looking back. War consumed everything, love, promises, even guilt. "Yes," he said finally, voice rough. "I knew her." Lyra's stare was sharp enough to cut steel. "She was my mother." The words fell like a hammer. Jareth's chest tightened, every regret clawing up from the grave he had buried them in. The curve of her jaw, the fire in her eyes, it wasn't just resemblance. It was truth. His daughter had been here all along, surviving the galaxy's cruelty without him. He wanted to speak, to explain, but before he could, the desert itself seemed to shudder. The firelight flickered wildly. A sound like thunder rumbled across the horizon. Jareth rose instantly, scanning the dunes. From the distance, a shadow loomed, massive and crawling. As it drew nearer, moonlight revealed a shape that blotted out the stars. A Zerath war crawler. The machine was a fortress on legs, a kilometer-wide monstrosity of chitin and steel. Its many limbs stabbed into the sand as it advanced, grinding dunes to dust beneath its bulk. Spires of weapons jutted from its back, glowing with pulsing energy. Swarms of smaller creatures spilled from its underbelly, spilling across the desert like a tide. "Gods!" Lyra breathed, clutching her weapon. "They're moving the crawler to secure the signal," Jareth realized. The beacon they were following wasn't just a survivor's call, it was bait, or worse, a contested prize. And now, the Zerath were sending their heaviest war machine to crush anything near it. The ground shook harder, forcing them to brace against the wreckage. Dust cascaded down around them, the air humming with alien machinery. Lyra looked at him, fierce and unyielding. "We're not turning back." Jareth met her eyes, torn between fear and pride. She had inherited Rinna's stubborn fire, his own soldier's edge. And though the revelation of blood between them still churned in his chest, one truth anchored him. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a fighter, and she had chosen this path. "No," he agreed, voice steady. "We're not." The crawler loomed closer, its cannons glowing like the eyes of a god of war. If they wanted answers, if they wanted a chance at survival, they would have to pass beneath the shadow of the Dominion's war beast. The desert wasn't just a graveyard anymore. It had become the staging ground for the next war. And father and daughter, united not by choice, but by blood and survival, were walking straight into the storm. The beacon had led them to the jagged mouth of a canyon, where steel doors were half buried beneath centuries of sand. Human engineering, disguised against the eyes of conquerors. Jareth triggered the coded panel with a sequence he still remembered from long-ago campaigns, and the doors ground open to reveal a hidden citadel carved deep into the rock. Inside, the air smelled of oil, sweat, and desperation. Ragged soldiers in patched uniforms manned gun nests. Engineers huddled over consoles scavenged from half-destroyed ships. The entire place hummed with the quiet energy of resistance. At the center stood Commander Reyes, tall and battle-worn, one eye hidden behind a scarred implant. His voice carried the weight of too many lost battles when he addressed Jareth and Lyra. "The Zerath are deploying a full fleet over Avaris 9, he said, pointing to a holographic projection of orbit. Red icons swarmed the skies, blotting out the planet's blue line. Once their dreadnoughts finish the orbital barrage, there won't be a single grain of this desert left untouched." Jareth folded his arms. "Then we take the fight to them before they finish the job." Reyes gave a grim smile. "Easier said than done. We have one ship left worth flying, the HMS Valiant. She's old, patched together from salvage, but her spine is strong. If we can punch a hole in the Zerath formation, the fleet might scatter. We'll only get one chance." Lyra's jaw tightened. "Then we don't waste it." "Put me in." Reyes hesitated, eyes flicking between her and Jareth. "She's not a soldier. She fights like one," Jareth said firmly. He didn't explain why, didn't reveal what he had just learned about her. But his voice left no room for argument. Within the hour, they were aboard the Valiant. The warship was scarred, bulkheads stripped bare to show exposed conduits, but her engines roared like a beast eager for blood. Crews strapped into stations, gunners calibrated turrets, and pilots sealed themselves into cockpits. As the ship broke atmosphere, the void erupted with chaos. The stars were gone, swallowed by the glow of alien armadas. Zerath destroyers moved in tight formation, their hulls pulsing with living bioluminescence. Beyond them, two dreadnoughts drifted like titanic predators, each capable of tearing continents apart with a single strike. "Target their carrier lines," Reyes barked. The Valiant dove into the fray, cannons blazing. Bolts of fire tore across the black, smashing into Zerath frigates. One erupted into a blossom of green light, chunks spinning into the void. But for every enemy destroyed, 3 more closed in. Jareth gripped the gunnery console, his hands steady despite the shaking deck. Plasma blasts streaked past the hull, explosions rattling the ship. "We won't survive this slugging match," he growled. Reyes glanced back. "Then we board them." A ripple of silence passed through the command deck. Boarding a dreadnought was madness, but madness was all they had left. Lyra stood tall, eyes burning. "Tell me where to hit." Minutes later, she and Jareth were crammed inside an assault pod with a squad of Marines. The pod's interior was dark, only the red lights flickering as it detached from the Valiant. Outside, the war blazed. Fighters darted past, capital ships traded broadsides, and the pod hurtled straight into the maw of the largest Zerath dreadnought. The impact jarred every bone in Jareth's body. The pod tore through layers of alien armor before embedding in a hangar bay. Explosives blew the hatch outward, and the squad surged into the ship, rifles spitting fire. The interior was a nightmare of organic steel, walls that pulsed faintly like living tissue. Zerath warriors poured from every corridor, shrieking war cries. The Marines clashed with them in brutal close-quarters combat, gunfire, blades, acid, and blood. Lyra was in the thick of it. She moved with ruthless precision, cutting through Zerath with the speed of someone who fought for more than survival, someone who fought for meaning. Jareth watched her lead, barking orders to men twice her age, dragging the wounded back, never faltering. They pressed deeper into the dreadnought, toward the core that powered its weapons. Explosions rocked the walls as the Valiant fought outside to buy them time. "Core chambers ahead," Jareth said, checking the last power cell in his rifle. His eyes swept to Lyra. She was bloodied, but her fire hadn't dimmed. In that moment, he realized something bitter and beautiful. She had never needed him to shape her. She had shaped herself in a galaxy that broke most souls, and now, side by side, father and daughter advanced toward the heart of the enemy's war machine. The fate of Avarice 9, and maybe all of humanity's scattered colonies, rested on whether they made it through the next door. The dreadnought's corridors shook with the fury of battle. Firefights erupted in every junction as Marines tried to hold off waves of Zirath drones pouring from hatchways. Jareth and Lyra pushed at the front, cutting through the alien labyrinth toward the reactor chamber, the one target that could cripple the behemoth from within. The closer they came, the more resistance they met. Zirath warriors fought with suicidal frenzy, claws scraping sparks against armored plating, shrieking in unison as though one mind drove them all. Twice, the squad was nearly overwhelmed. Twice, Lyra refused to give ground. At one choke point, she vaulted over wreckage and drove her stolen plasma blade into an alien commander, igniting its carapace. The Marines surged after her, roaring. Her courage had become their anchor, their rallying flame. When the last barricade fell, they reached the dreadnought's heart. The chamber opened like a cathedral of nightmares, a vast sphere where walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins, feeding energy into a core suspended in the center. The reactor glowed an eerie blue-green, throbbing like a colossal heartbeat. But they weren't alone. From the shadows stepped a figure that dwarfed every warrior they had fought. The Zarath warlord stood twice the height of a man, armor fused to living tissue, 4 arms ending in hooked blades. Its eyes blazed with cold hunger, and its voice was a grinding chorus that rattled the chamber. "Humans!" it hissed, always crawling where they don't belong. "You will bleed for this desecration." The Marines opened fire, but the warlord moved with shocking speed, deflecting shots with its bladed arms. In a single sweep, it cut down 2 soldiers, their screams silenced instantly. The survivors scrambled back, realizing this was no ordinary foe. Jareth shoved Lyra behind him. "Stay sharp!" The warlord came at him, striking like a thunderstorm. Jareth's rifle spat 3 bolts before the weapon overheated, then the alien's blade shattered it in half. Sparks sprayed his armor. He switched to his combat knife, dodging, parrying, his movements honed from decades of battle. But the warlord's power was crushing. Every impact drove him backward, every strike testing the limits of his battered body. Lyra darted in, slashing across the alien's flank. Acid blood hissed against the floor, but the warlord backhanded her with such force she slammed into the wall, coughing blood. Jareth's heart froze, but she forced herself up, defiance blazing through the pain. "Together!" she shouted. They moved as one. Jareth lunged high, drawing the warlord's guard while Lyra slipped beneath, carving into its lower joints. For a heartbeat, it seemed they might overwhelm it, but the alien roared, a shockwave bursting from its chest. The blast hurled them both across the chamber. The warlord advanced on Lyra first. She scrambled up, blade raised, but its claw locked around her wrist. The alien lifted her effortlessly, mandibles opening wide. Jareth roared and hurled himself forward. Armor cracked as he slammed shoulder first into the monster, forcing it back. His knife stabbed deep into its abdomen, but the alien didn't falter. It threw him aside like a rag doll. Pain flared through his ribs as he crashed to the floor. For a moment, everything blurred. He saw Lyra's face, bloodied, desperate, locked in the warlord's grip. He saw the reactor pulsing behind them, fragile and waiting to be destroyed. And he knew the truth. He didn't have the strength left to kill this creature. But he had enough to hold it down. Jareth pushed himself up, every muscle screaming. He staggered forward, grabbed the alien's arm, and dragged it down with the fury of a dying man. Armor split, bones strained, but he clung on with unbreakable resolve. "Do it, Lyra!" he bellowed. She didn't hesitate. Tearing free, she sprinted past them, her blade flashing as she dove toward the reactor. Sparks burst as she drove the weapon deep into its core. Energy howled, flooding the chamber with blinding light. The walls convulsed, the heartbeat of the dreadnought faltering. The warlord thrashed, claws rending Jareth's armor, piercing flesh. Pain ripped through him, but he held on, forcing it against the reactor as its death wail echoed like thunder. The explosion came like the birth of a star. Lyra was flung clear, tumbling into a collapsing corridor as alarms screamed. Fire and alien ichor consumed the chamber. In those final moments, she glimpsed her father one last time, locked in combat with the beast, both swallowed by the inferno. The dreadnought convulsed violently, tearing itself apart from the inside. The Marines dragged Lyra toward the retreating pods as the ship disintegrated around them. She fought them, screaming his name, but the blast drowned everything. Behind them, the behemoth erupted in a cataclysm of green fire, lighting the void like a dying sun. Jareth Kane was gone, but his sacrifice had torn the heart out of the Zerath fleet. The dreadnought's death scarred the void. A wave of green fire rolled through space, shattering Zerath formations and blinding sensors. One moment their fleet pressed with overwhelming dominance, the next their command hub vanished in a silent, cataclysmic bloom. Ships reeled, coordination dissolved, and the swarm fractured into chaos. Human vessels, battered and broken, seized the moment. Captains shouted for the counteroffensive. Fighters poured through the wreckage, and cruisers punched burning holes into the disarrayed alien ranks. The tide shifted with shocking speed. For the first time, humanity's ragged defenders saw victory not as a distant dream, but as something tangible, something earned through blood and fire. In the evacuation pods, Lyra stirred awake to alarms. The vessel rocked under turbulence, streaks of light searing across the viewport as fragments of the dreadnought blazed past. She pressed her hand against the glass, eyes wide, still seeing her father's figure swallowed in the explosion. Every heartbeat throbbed with grief and fury. When the pod finally docked with the Valor's Edge, survivors stumbled out, some half-carried, others still in shock. Marines clapped one another on the back, murmuring names of the fallen. And then silence rippled through them when Lyra emerged. She was limping, her armor cracked, her blade scorched, but her posture carried something unyielding. A commander's weight. They looked to her as if instinctively, recognizing the fire that had burned in her father. Admiral Saren met her with weary eyes. The dreadnought is gone. The fleet's breaking. You did this? Lyra swallowed hard, voice hoarse. He did. And she told them of Jareth Kane, how he had wrestled the alien warlord into the flames, how his final breath had bought them this chance. A hush fell. Hardened soldiers who had lost everything stood straighter, touched by the story. His sacrifice was no longer just his. It belonged to all of them. But grief had no time to rest. Sensors screamed, scattered Zerath wings regrouped, trying to form a desperate shield wall. The human fleet still bled. The war wasn't over. Lyra stepped forward, gripping the railing. Her voice cut through the chaos. Listen to me. The enemy has lost its head, but not its claws. If we falter now, Jareth's death means nothing. We strike hard, we strike now, and we show them what humanity does when cornered. The bridge erupted in shouts of approval. Orders relayed instantly. Engines burned hotter. Humanity surged forward like a blade driving into the enemy's exposed heart. The next hours blurred into a storm of light and fire. Human destroyers split through alien wings, frigates darted between titans to unleash payloads, and fighter pilots tore through swarms in coordinated sweeps. Everywhere Lyra looked, she saw Jareth's spirit reflected, in the stubborn defiance of crews refusing to yield, in the desperate courage of those throwing themselves into hopeless charges and somehow winning. By dusk cycle, the stars grew quiet. Where once the Zerath armada had darkened the skies, now only drifting husks remained. Humanity had not only survived the impossible, they had broken their hunters, but triumph could not erase what was lost. Later, in the silence of the officer's ward, Lyra sat alone. Her hands trembled as she unsealed a small pouch taken from Jareth's armor before the evacuation, his last keepsake. Inside lay a cracked canteen scorched at the edges. She remembered the desert, the moment he had offered her the last sip of water, never knowing who she truly was. She pressed it to her chest, eyes burning. "You gave me life twice," she whispered. First with water, then with fire. Behind her, Admiral Saren entered quietly. The fleet's naming the campaign after him. The Kane Offensive.
The victory?
It's already becoming legend. Lyra nodded, but her gaze stayed fixed on the stars. Legends were for history. For her, he was something more. Her father, the man she had barely known yet, carried in her blood. The Admiral studied her. "What will you do now?" She rose slowly, resolve hardening in her expression. The war isn't done. The Zerath will regroup. When they do, I'll be there. Not just as his daughter, as his heir. Humanity will never thirst again while I still breathe." Saren bowed his head, recognizing a leader rising from ashes. And so the tale of Jareth Kane did not end in that reactor chamber. His sacrifice became a torch, carried forward by the daughter who bore both his courage and his fire. Across colonies and fleets his story spread. The man who gave his last sip of water to a stranger in the desert, only to later give his life to save all humanity. A reminder that even in the darkest void, human compassion could ignite wars, win them, and leave stars burning brighter. For the galaxy had learned that day, humans might break, but they never bowed. And Lyra Kane swore on the memory of her father that they never would.